Hello there. I am Kelsey Nestle, and today we're going to talk about flipped learning, specifically in an English language learning context. Let's get started. Actually, I'm going to hide that little monster. Okay. The first thing I want you to do, think about a couple of questions. One, why do we have class? What is the point? How do we learn? And number two, what objectives do you have for your classes? And if you are in a non-English language learning context, you obviously have different objectives. No worries. Just take a minute to think about these and jot them down. Feel free to pause the video. All right. So now that you have these, how do they fit into a flipped learning context? First things first, what is flipped learning? In the usual classroom, the in-class time is spent on teaching content. In my case, English grammar. And then students go home to do their practice. You might recognize this face from your own learning experiences, I know. I do. I remember being in a chemistry classroom where, at this point, I felt like I completely understood thermodynamics, but then when I got home, I had no idea what I was doing. What flipped learning does is it flips this. It moves the content home so that students engage with that content and those basic Bloom's levels from home. And then you do the skills practice in class where the instructor can provide support. So when they're doing those thermodynamic questions and they're getting confused, you can go and be like, this part. Okay. Why did I choose to move to a flipped learning model? For a couple of reasons. The first was my teaching philosophy. I found that how I was teaching didn't align with how I felt good teaching should happen. I believe in a very student-centered teaching model. And what I found prior to doing flipped learning is I was spending a lot of teacher talking time at the front of the classroom explaining grammar. And I would intentionally plan grammar games and grammar activities, but they weren't getting much authentic speaking time and long speaking time. And if they did, it was always in that extra time at the end of class, if we have time for this. The other thing is data-driven responsive teaching. Unless you're really intentional to collect that formative assessment, right, and you're grading it immediately so that you can give that feedback and do that remediation right away, often we don't get any data about whether students understand or don't understand until the exams. And by that point, it's too late to provide remediation. Right? The other big thing was my experience as a student language learner. When I first came to Korea, I took a couple of different Korean language classes, and they were generally very teacher-centered. And I found myself getting frustrated because I can learn grammar at home. I bought the textbook, it explains the grammar. I can go online, I can use apps like Duolingo. What I couldn't do was I couldn't practice conversational Korean. I found myself, even after having taken these intensive language courses and spending hundreds of dollars on them, that when I got into a daily speaking situation, I got very nervous, clammed up, so worried about doing things correctly that nothing came out of my mouth at all. You might recognize this behavior from some of your own students. I am not a good language learner. right? So how does flipped learning address this? The first is that by moving that grammar content outside of the classroom, you're creating more time in class for that authentic and meaningful practice, more of that one-on-one conversation, more of that project-based learning, when there are other people to directly respond to whether they're understandable or not. And you're there to provide feedback on pronunciation and vocabulary. Right. The pre-class work, the content that they have to interact with before they get into the classroom, gives me immediate feedback that helps me decide what to do in class, right? Depending on how they perform on that, what they do well, what they don't do well, I do more or less of that in-class practice and provide remediation for what they really need remediation for. The last one is students can review materials as often as they need to. It's all online. They do it when they're available to do it. They can pause, slow down, repeat, listen with subtitles. So they can really curate their own learning experience to what they need. If you have very strong learners, maybe they don't spend a lot of time. They do it quickly. They're done. They're on to other things. If you have lower level learners, this really gives them time to sit with material. Okay. You can do this in any number of ways. Right? It can be one lesson, every single lesson, just a makeup lesson, just in order for students to work on this project. Here are a couple of styles. You could go tech light if you're not super tech friendly, right? For the content portion, you could have them read the material. If you're using a textbook like Smart Choice, right? Read the grammar in the book. You could even create a handout that you print out and give to them, right, with the content. Your check for understanding, again, if you're using that textbook, you can use the exercises in the textbook and then check them together in class. And then the skills practice is really what activities and things really fit with your teaching style. So this is really low impact. You don't have to do a whole lot of extra prep to make this work. Right? You don't have to make a bunch of new materials to do this flipped. You could do a blended tech, non-tech version, right? They can still get the grammar from the book or a handout. If you're using, again, something like Smart Choice, there are online generated questions. Use that for homework. And again, that skill practice is up to you. I use a tech-heavy version. For the content, I have videos. And if you choose this form, you can either find videos online. YouTube has a bunch of them. Just make sure you're checking them and that they match your course objectives. I make mine. My check for understanding, I make online homework in Google Forms and then use the textbook exercises to help review and provide remediation as needed. And again, the rest of the time is on that skills practice. Here's an example lesson plan, right? Before class, I prepare the content and the practice, and then students review and complete that content before class. I allow them to turn it in any time before class starts. After class starts, I consider it late and they lose points. I know there are other instructors who do flipped learning and they have them turn the homework in 24 hours or 12 hours ahead of time so that the instructor has more time to review it and help them choose how to conduct the rest of the class or the next class. In class, I start usually with either a vocabulary quiz or a warm-up activity. We have 2 classes a week. One class is the vocab quiz. The next class is the warm-up activity. This activity is either a review or to help them review the previous content, or it's a preview of the upcoming content. And it's some kind of game, speaking activity. Ideally, they're standing up, moving around. The next 5 to 10 minutes, I open up the homework and we go through the questions. If there are questions that many students got wrong, then we take a minute, I review it. Based on this, I do this. If I have a class, every class is different. If I have a class that understands it, doesn't have any problems, they found it easy and they aced the online homework, then we move straight to that skills practice. If I have a class that's really struggling and they don't understand the grammar at all, right, then we sit down and we do more remediation. Right? I might explain the grammar again in a different way. We might diagram some sentences. We'll do extra practices in the textbook. Say we're doing present perfect. Maybe in the online homework, right? They are getting have and has perfectly fine. Maybe they're even getting their past participles perfectly fine. But maybe this class is having trouble with identifying whether to use present perfect or simple past. So I'll take this time to practice that specific skill. Maybe a different class is fine with those, but they're having trouble with the past participle. So we'll take this time to practice that past participle, right? And then again, the rest of the class is one-on-one speaking or targeted skills-based activity. Right? So what kinds of things can you do with your newfound class time, right? Speed dating, project-based learning, running dictation, video projects, presentations, surveys, interviews, student-led discussions, highs and lows, grammar games and activities, debates, all kinds of different things. And again, this is specifically for an English language learning context. If you're in a different subject, you'll know activities that can be done in that space. But these are all activating those higher levels of understanding. And students within these will be able to really engage in the content in meaningful ways that just doing exercise in the workbook doesn't quite do. Okay. So let's talk a little bit more about how I do this tech-heavy bit. The first resource I use is Schoology. You might have heard of this. This is a free online learning management system. You don't have to pay for it. I use this as my student to content interface. Everybody signs up for it. They get a folder for each chapter. Within that folder, they have the practice, a copy of the video, a copy of the PowerPoint if they prefer just to review the PowerPoint without my voice, right? So this is their way to engage with the content. It also has other tools for me. There's a grade book. I can create rubrics that I can attach to assignments. I can host discussion boards between students, which is great for a language classroom especially. Students can submit work through this, and you can put in due dates and they will be able to see those due dates as they come up, so you don't have to remind them every single class. Right. There are also testing functions in here. I don't use it. I use Google Forms, which I'll talk about later. But if you choose to create tests within here, they have a bunch of different type of question styles. It will automatically grade them and automatically input those scores into the grade book. And once you've created the materials for these classes, you don't have to recreate them every time. You can save them to a resource folder and copy them into other classes or into new courses, which is fabulous. This was a big one for me. This is actually why I switched to Schoology, is I started having students record speaking, and then I was giving them feedback on it. What I wanted to be able to do was to look at their speaking from the beginning of the semester and compare it to speaking at the end of the semester to see if they improved, got more confident. But I needed to be able to save recordings, and it takes up a lot of space. And Schoology, students can submit work including recordings, and it will save it there. And you can attach rubrics to it, which is lovely. The second thing or tool I use is Screencastify. That's actually what you're viewing this through right now, is a Screencastify video. It records everything that appears on your screen. It can be a PowerPoint like this, or it can be a website, just whatever shows up. You can include voice, embed a video webcam. I didn't choose to do that for this one. There are also drawing tools. And they easily upload to YouTube. There is a share function. And so I upload them to YouTube and then embed them in my Google Forms, which I'll talk about next. Google Forms, right? The Google Form is how I have them do their pre-class practice. Like I said, Schoology does have a testing function. The reason I continue to use Google Forms is that I really like how the data is displayed and how the detail in the analytics that they give you. Schoology has more options for like question style and putting timers on questions and not letting students navigate away from screens and those types of things. But when it comes to being able to look at the data immediately in the classroom and analyze it for, okay, this is the percent of students who are getting this correct. This is the most common incorrect answer, that kind of thing. I find Google Forms a little more helpful. Okay. So the next thing, moving on to the next phase of this, what does flipped learning look like for students? And how much work do you actually have to do to flip it? And again, like I said, there is a Tech Lite version. You just use the materials from the textbook. You can always use materials that you find on YouTube or online. We're teachers, we know how to use our resources. You don't have to make everything. But let's take a look at how this looks from a student's perspective. Go ahead and open up your phones or your tablet and go to Schoology.com. You can register as a student or a teacher. Either way, you'll be able to sign up for my course, so it doesn't matter. And the access code is ZRB7CGBXH2. Pause if you need to. I'm going to move away from the screen and show you what Schoology looks like. All right. So we'll come over here and zoom in a little bit. Ooh, a little too much. Sorry about that. Okay, so this is Schoology. This is the teacher interface, right? This is my side. As you can see, there's a folder in here. I've also put a copy of this PowerPoint, so if you ever want to look at it again. And then there's some example homework. Say I wanted to make something new. I can just go like that, add assignments, add links. Right? Maybe I want to add a folder. Lovely. I don't actually need to add a folder, so I'm not going to do that. Right. As you can see in this folder, I have a couple of different resources. I have their homework, right? Copy of the PowerPoint, a copy of the video. This one actually had a bonus video. There's some expansion materials that I included. That is one way that you can use Flip Learning, is for expansion materials, right? And bonus practice is all in there. Now, let's see what it looks like as a student. Thank you, friends. We're going to view it as Nico. Okay, and this is his side, right? He doesn't have any of the editing tools. He can see over here what's coming up, what's due. So example homework is due on Saturday, April 6th at 5 p.m., right? That's all right there. He can come in here, view this PowerPoint if he wants to. Very slowly as my computer loads, right? And it all views from within here. You don't have to be signed in. Make sure if you're sharing materials that it's open to be viewed by anyone with the link. All right. They can also look at their grades. Right. So you can see I haven't actually given any grades for this yet, but once I do, they'll pop up over here. All right. For our hypothetical class. Something you can do is you can assign objectives to your assignments, and as students complete them, right, it'll show them what they've mastered. Let's go back to the teacher end of things. Right, assignments, test quizzes, files, links, discussion boards, right, extra resources, right. As I've been creating courses, I save my materials online or in Schoology, so I can just come over here. And now I want to copy not all of Smart Choice 2. Let's do, I don't know, chapter 3, right? So I can copy the whole folder. I can copy individual things. Right? So that is Schoology, and that's how students interact with this. And as a teacher, you can come over here, do all of your grading. Right. Out of 100 points, that's a little bit high. There we go. Right. So the next question I want you to think about is, could you see using flipped learning in your classroom? Do you think you could there's space for you to use flipped learning in your classroom? Does it fit with your teaching style? Why or why not? And if yes, how would you do it? Would you do it for one class? Would you do it for all of your classes, for a project? Would you do a tech-heavy version, a tech-light version, blended? So take a minute to look at this. Pause the video if you need to. When you're ready, restart. Okay. So now that we've looked at kind of the how to do flipped learning, let's look at how it impacts student comprehension. Right? It all, at the end of the day, comes down to, are students learning more from this? Do they get more from this? How can we tell? Well, we all do exams, right? So on my midterm in spring of 2017, when I was still doing my standard style of teaching, right? This is my spread. And I like to see the average around 75. So I do curve this as needed. Okay. And then in spring of 2018, with that same course, I instituted flipped learning. As you can see, everything shifted up a little bit on that exam. Right? These scores are all based on the average, right? This middle chunk. Right? So the lower quartile, 2.9 points. This is out of 100%, mind you. See, the whole class average rose by 8.9%, which is a pretty decent rise, if I say so myself. And the upper 8 points. Right? So overall, positive, but we're seeing greater gains for those students who are more motivated, right? Flipped learning really puts learning in the hands of students. You give them all of the materials, but you're not covering the grammar in class. So those students who weren't going to do any of the homework, but would maybe come to class and learn by osmosis, aren't going to be getting that in-class instruction. The spread for this one, it's again a little bit wider because again, more motivated students are getting a little more from the system. What I do like about the system is students who maybe don't have low motivation, but are maybe lower level, and that would usually put them down here for this style. In flipped learning, because they have access to those materials at the pace that they need them, can shift up here, and I think that's why this average shifted up. I did look at scores from fall of 17 and 18. I made some changes to the course, so that's why we're not looking at their box and whisker plots. But I did see gains in that one as well, and the spread didn't follow the same pattern, but pretty decent gains for all sections for fall of 18 compared to fall of 17. What about the final? Right. So the final here. Right. So for the lower section, we're actually seeing a little bit of a drop. And this again, as students get to the end of the semester and they realize they have other classes that they're having to focus on, those students who were maybe just kind of caught up at the beginning are dropping off. So this drops a little bit. The median still rose by 3.2%, right? And the upper quartile rose by 4.3. So again, we're seeing greater gains in that upper section. And the spread is much bigger for this class. Again, that difference between motivated and unmotivated students. For fall of 17 and 18, saw gains in all sections, not as much for the median, but saw greater gains in the lower, a little bit in the upper, and the range is not as dramatic. Right? So fall of 18 was the second time I was doing flipped learning. I made some modifications to how I was doing it. The homework wasn't quite as intense, so I was maybe bringing some of those lower level students along in a way that I wasn't here because there was just too much homework to do. So that might be part of why the range didn't split as dramatically. And here we're actually seeing greater gains for that lower section of students. Okay, so that's how it impacts students' scores, right? Their direct comprehension. But how do students feel about this, right? Okay. You might recognize something like this. Your school or university probably has some form of evaluation system. This is my school's evaluation system. It is on a 4-point score system. You can see I have gains in just about every category. The only one that I didn't was all scheduled classes, probably whatever holiday happened that semester. The areas that I saw the greatest gains were class materials, help students understand the lessons better, right? So directly talking about those videos and online practices, right? Help students improve their speaking skill because they're getting more in-class time for speaking. Number 9, more student-to-student interaction because, again, that prolonged speaking time is with other students. And number 11, more feedback for speaking, right? With those recordings and transcripts. Number 8 also saw some decent gains. Learn, use phrases and words. With the vocabulary quizzes, it's slang that directly relates to the topic of the one-on-one conversation questions. So they're able to take that vocabulary and then directly implement it into that long conversation. Right? Now that's the university one. I also do my own evaluation. Completely anonymous. Students can say whatever they feel like. At the end, I ask what they like and what they don't like about the class. And the thing that they talk about the most in the like section is speaking. Speaking with classmates is good. Mix and mingle was so good. I like speaking time with grammar, right? I get lots and lots of comments about how much they really like doing that speaking. When I ask them if they have enough speaking time, right? 71% say it's a perfect amount of speaking time with, half of the class being speaking time because of flipped learning. And 23.8% say they even want more, right? A very, very small percent say it was too much. Okay. And when I asked them what they would prefer, grammar videos online or grammar in class and homework, 85.7% say they would rather do the grammar at home and have more speaking time than do the grammar in class. Right. When I ask them how helpful the videos are on a scale of not helpful to very helpful, again, we're generally in that upper bit. Other students in the things I like have said, I like the videos, they're easy, can speed the correct speed or a good speed, easy to understand. Homework is useful for studying. Right. When I ask them how much time they spend on homework, 85.7% say they spend 0 to 40 minutes on their homework, which I think is a reasonable amount, right? 28.6 say 0 to 20. Oops, sorry. 9.5% say 40 to 1 hour. And this is, again, where your materials really adapt to your students, in that if you have those lower level students who need more time, need to slow things down, need to watch things a couple of times, then, they take as long as they need to. If you have students who are basically native speakers and they don't need all of that extra practice, they watch the video, don't watch the video, whatever, do it quickly. When they're done, they're done. It's what the student needs. So, big picture, all things considered. Pros. Now I have a much better balance between my grammar instruction and my speaking practice. It went from about a 70-30 split to a 30-70 split of teaching, teacher time, and 70% student speaking time, which is much more comfortable with my teaching style. I'm able to give real-time responsive teaching and feedback based on what each class needs. Students have teacher support when they need it. I can give them feedback on their speaking in class. I can sit down with them and have conversations while they're doing conversation practice and build that rapport and give them feedback there. Right. It also makes my instruction more consistent. Right? If you're teaching 4 different sections of the same course, the first time you teach it is probably the roughest, right? You're refreshing your memory of how you're teaching it. And then the last time you maybe remembered things that you didn't say the first time, right? By moving it to video, I do a couple of practices and then I record and I remember those different things that I maybe would have forgotten. I have the PowerPoint all itemized. So I know that every class is getting the same content. Right. And again, students can curate their education, rewatch content with subtitles, slow things down, pause, rewind, etc. Cons. You have to rely on your check for understanding to give you meaningful feedback, right? Usually, if you're in the classroom teaching grammar, you can look at student faces, and if they all look confused, you know they don't understand. Or if they're all nodding and they're like, uh-huh, or they're raising their hand and giving answers, you're getting that soft feedback in person. When the content is at home, you don't see that. You don't have bodies to look at. You have to have a good check for understanding, formative assessment to figure that out. But as we all know, even if students are nodding and saying yes in class, that doesn't necessarily mean they understand. You have to have homework accountability or it doesn't work. If there's no way to hold students accountable and make sure that they did the homework before coming to class, then students don't do it. They come to class, they don't know the content, then you wind up teaching it anyway, and then you aren't getting that extra time to expand. The way I do this, again, is they have the Google Forms quizzes, and then it is due before class time starts. If it's late, they lose a certain number of points. Right. The other downside is if you're doing a tech-heavy version, and especially if you're doing my version of a tech-heavy, I've been making all of my videos and I've been creating all of my Google Forms. It's really time-consuming. The upside is that once it's made, you can reuse them, right? It's there, it's done. But again, you definitely don't have to do it my style. There are lots and lots of resources online for you to use as well. Okay, so based on my research into this project and what students said, they said speaking with classmates is good, but they'd like more time to speak with me. So this semester, I've tried to be more intentional about joining student pairings when they're doing their long speaking. Right, correcting the speaking script can help where they check mistakes. I have more students this semester, so I haven't quite figured out how to do this. When last semester, what I had them do was they printed their transcripts, and then in class they made corrections. But with as many students as I have this semester, I feel like we'd kill an entire forest. So they've been submitting that online, and I'm not sure how to get that same interaction with their speaking and their mistakes in that correction. So this is still in progress. Too much homework. I have reduced the number of questions, and my score still increased last semester, and last semester I had reduced the amount of homework. So this is actually getting better, and it didn't really hurt my scores too much to reduce the number of questions. Right, so more teacher participation in one-on-one time, more feedback. I embedded the rubric and then in Schoology, and so I use that rubric to give that feedback. Have students correct their grammar. And I did, in fact, reduce the number of homework questions. Right. I'm debating maybe having them do extra credit or giving them the option to do extra credit recordings and transcripts. The last question I have for you is, how would you ensure student participation? Like I said, one of those hinge points for this to work is that accountability. What would you do in your classroom to make sure and to hold students accountable for that? And do you have any questions? All right, so that is it for me. Thank you so much for listening. And again, if you have any questions, here is my contact information. And now that you have signed up for my Schoology class, you can always email me through there as well. But that is it. Have a great day.